Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Tuesday the 1st of August 2023 here in the Oak Room at the County Building, Stafford. This meeting will be webcast live and archived for 12 months, and it can be viewed at the following link. We have with us this morning from officers John Tradewell, who is the Deputy Chief Executive and Director for Corporate Services. We have Kate Lauder, the County Solicitor, and Lindsay Bissell, who is the Assistant Director for Strategy and Transformation. And we have politically, we have the leader of the Council, Councillor Alan White. Can we have apologies, please?
We've received apologies from Councillors Francis and Perry.
Thank you. Any other apologies at all? Okay. Item 2, declarations of interest from anyone. If during the meeting something becomes apparent that it is a declaration, please make yourself known to myself and we'll make sure we get that noted. So item 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of June 2023, pages 1 to 4. I'll go through in page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, the meeting as a whole. Everyone happy and in favour? Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the main item of the agenda this morning, which is the Integrated Performance Report, Quarter 1, 2023-24. Leader.
Thank you, Chair. I am hopeful that Councillor Parry will be joining us. He's downstairs at the moment, so if there are financial questions, hopefully he will be able to answer some of those. The highlights of the Integrated Performance Report Quarter 1 are set out in the paper. And just to touch on them briefly, Household Support Fund continues to be a success, as does the Staffordshire Warmer Homes, even though it's summer. But of course, one of the things that your attention will be drawn to is the overspend in children's services. We continue to do what's necessary to manage our finances effectively, but the latest revenue forecast outturn shows an overspend of £9.5 million compared to what it should be as a balanced budget. If you go to page 10 of the report, some of the key highlights are set out there, including the We Are Staffordshire programme, which has been extremely successful. We went to the UK Real Estate Infrastructure and Investment Conference in May, which was well attended by a range of participants in the infrastructure and investment sector. We were able to highlight the offer that Staffordshire has, and in particular the brochure that we've produced, which includes an array of offerings from every single district and borough across this county, and was warmly received by many investors. The Warmer Home Scheme I've referred to previously, as I have with the Household Support Fund. The holiday activities and food programme is relevant now, because of course we're into the summer holidays as we speak. Highways maintenance, I'm hoping that you are seeing some significant improvement in highways across the county. I know that the areas that I've been travelling across, certainly I have. I know there are areas which will always remain challenging. Councillor Heath, of course, of the 6,400 kilometres of road in Staffordshire, she's got 6,300 kilometres in her division, so it's always going to be a challenge there. And then the household waste recycling centres, we talked about the introduction of permits for vans and trailers at those sites, and of course Councillor Yates kindly brought up the charging scheme which we're investigating now. Thank you for that, Councillor Yates. But those key challenges are ones that we have our focus on really. The children in care costs and indeed the numbers of children in care continue to rise, and we'll be looking at that programme in some detail over the next few weeks and months. Special educational needs demand there continues to rise. We have had some success in recruiting educational psychologists, but the rate limiting factor is the number of educational psychologists that are available and the demand for them. And then also adult social care demand continues to be challenging, and those deprivation of liberty safeguard requests remain high, despite the fact, and as Councillor Pert will know well from his committee, our imploring government to continue to press on with the forgotten the modified scheme that is going to be liberty protection safeguards and the implementation of those, which will be less onerous and less expensive. So, Mr. Chairman, that is the sort of highlights of the quarter one. It's only been a few weeks since we did the whole year, but I think the thing I would, with respect, Mr. Chairman, draw your attention to is the challenge that we've highlighted with children and indeed the work that we're going to be doing to drill down on the, it's a hackneyed phrase, on the costs and what's going on with the with that particular area. Mr. Chairman.
For those just watching the meeting, we've just been joined by Councillor Ian Parry, who's the Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources. Councillor Parry, I realise you've only just arrived. Did you want to make any opening statement following the leader, or should we just start with questions around from the committee? Wally.
Cause of the overspend, which was in the children and families area. And I think the explanation behind that, of course, is the number of children coming into the system and less children that would be favourable exiting the system or going to permanent places. Not only that, the children in our care have probably higher needs, complex needs, and with complex needs comes cost. So the cost of placements is expensive, very expensive. And that's the work that we're trying to do. So about placement costs, about supporting families so less children come to the system, and helping families or helping children to find permanent places further on. So it's a complex, very sensitive and challenging area. We think we've got the right strategy, but I think, as the leader's probably said, we need to review that and ensure that we've got everything, all the components in place that will arrest that overspend moving forward. It's about children, it's not about cash.
Thank you, Councillor Parry. Where should we start? Councillor Worthington.
Yeah, I accept it's a difficult situation now with the number of these ECHPs that they're getting more and more and more. I believe it's up to 7,000 now from what I believe. But I've been helping a family which is not actually in my division, in Leek in Staffordshire. And the ECHP is 5 years out of date. And I'll tell you what, it's been a right struggle. You know, when I see offer every Staffordshire child, young person, the best start in life, I think the help the school has been no help whatsoever. It's sort of like it's a battle to get him the right school to go into. And some of these schools are full. There's been trouble getting an up-to-date CHP done. It's been an absolute nightmare. I just wonder, it's all right having an overspend, but you don't mind having an overspend if we're getting to the crux of the problem. So I don't know if we can get this sorted. I was going to send it. I know Jonathan helped me last time. I think he's cabinet member for that. But I'll send the details over to Ian, and if Ian can look into it for me, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Leader.
There are a couple of issues there that, as part of your statement, I think, Councillor Worthington. Number one is the number of EHCPs and the review of the EHCPs. As a result of our need to ensure that reviews take place in a timely fashion and on an annual basis, we agreed to put additional funds into EHCP funding so that we had additional key workers. I think we're referring to senior key workers already in post, as well as 8 key worker positions recruited and due to be in post in September. So that will increase the rate at which those children with EHCPs are seen. And it's important because EHCP is not necessarily a one-way street. You can have a review and come out of it, as well as perhaps needing one and getting an EHCP as appropriate. You referred to the second part of what you said, I think, was to do with schools and placement in schools of children with certain needs. That's a separate issue, if I might, Councillor Worthington, and if you could email on that particular issue, we'll look into it. I can't deal with individual cases at this meeting, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay.
Councillor Worthington, do you want to come back?
No, it's fine, thank you.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Yates. Apologies.
That's all right. Thank you. Trigger. Yes, quite, yes. Yes, just looking at the children's and care statistics, and I appreciate the fact that, you know, you say quite strongly that children and children's care and needs come first. That's a very difficult area to budget for. I can see that, and you know, whereas if you're comparing it to highways, where you can effectively slow things down if it's going to overspenditure and probably get away with it, certainly with children you obviously can't do that. A couple of things. One is just really asking for a bit of information. Children who are placed in care from outside of Staffordshire County Council, the costs associated with that are carried by the council, which actually places that care within Staffordshire. And that is the case, isn't it? We don't pick up any charges as a consequence of that. Do we actually place any of our children outside of Staffordshire in care? I can imagine, you know, when you're getting close to the borders, there must be an issue for that. And how do those costs, is there a premium cost because you're going to a neighbouring authority, or are the costs pretty much in line with what we'd expect to pay within Staffordshire itself, where we may have a little bit more control over the facilities and whatever. The second thing is that on the Daily Telegraph this morning, one of the headlines on the front page is about the fact that since lockdown, a lot more children are suffering from stress and anxiety, and I'm wondering whether this is a legacy of the lockdown and the COVID situation and the readjustment about bringing children back into sort of normal society and normal engagement. So I don't know whether there's a case there with families struggling, you know, younger families struggling and children struggling themselves, and that's a sort of long tail with a COVID effect. And the final point which I'll raise is that I noticed that the rate of 83 per 10,000 young people in the authority's care is higher than the national benchmark but lower than the regional benchmark. And I'm just wondering whether it's which benchmarks do you use when you come to budgeting? I know each child has its own care plan and its own requirements, so within, you know, a fixed number of children, it's not a case of having that child times X number of pounds, because each one's got a different requirement. But I'm just wondering what the process is for setting the budget, because perhaps in that case, and I'm sure you do, that gives you the leverage to ask for additional funds from Department of Education or central government or whatever to pull in, because it is a difficult thing to budget for, isn't it?
It's a lovely thought, and clearly what we have in terms of our children and families budget is finite. We increased it last year. We put more money into it because of the transitional costs of recruiting additional specialist positions to help us with the transition. So there was that. There was still managing the overspend until we arrest all of that by the transformation, and of course we still aren't there yet. So that's why it's grown in this current year. Placement costs are a big part of that, and it's a bit swings and roundabouts. Yes, we place some children where it's appropriate, maybe over a border in a different place, and it may well because of the suitability of the placement or the value for money cost of the placement, because you do have to consider value for money as well as appropriate place settings for children. And that is, you know, a key dynamic in what we do in terms of finding appropriate places for children. But we have some children with such complex needs, you know, quite easily runs into six figures in terms of the kind of specialist needs specialist accommodation that they need. So it isn't just a question of lots of children putting them into foster care or whatever. And because the market itself is finite, because you can't just find places like this, they have to be regulated, etc. So trying to find places like that means that the provider side can pretty much charge, you know, a bit of a ransom in a sense in some of these placements because of the complexity of them. That's the sort of challenge that we're grappling with all the time, and that's where your budget can be thrown simply with, you know, a dozen children come to the system, or unaccompanied asylum seeker children that again have additional needs on top of, you know, in terms of language barriers and things like that, and health and education. It can get very complicated, and that can skew the budget quite quickly. But we'd love to ask the government just for more money.
Councillor White.
Thanks. You asked about placements in county versus placements out of county and whether or not they balance. I don't have the answer to that. We can look at it for you and come back with an answer. You also then went on to talk about lockdown effects. At this meeting on the 20th of June, the committee asked me whether or not education, health and care plans issued had continued to rise and what the reason for that was likely to be. All we were able to do was speculate that it was in part down to lockdown, And in the same token, this time round, I'm afraid, Councillor Yates, it is, I can't really speculate with any sort of accuracy as to the cause of the rise of the numbers. And anything other than that would be just sticking a finger up in the air. But that then led to your question about the rate per 100,000 being at 83, being higher than the national average but lower than the regional average. Of course, the regional average is skewed by a very near neighbour of ours, which is Stoke-on-Trent City Council, who I believe are at about 190, I'm looking there, 190 per 100,000, which really is very, very high indeed, and does have an impact on the regional numbers. In conversation with the new chief executive and others, we are keen to get our numbers per 100,000 down to a rate that reflects a national number. But as Councillor Parry quite rightly pointed out, this is about the children, and he is constantly reminding me that actually, if a child needs to be in our care, then the child needs to be in our care, and it doesn't really matter what the national profiles look like. But we do need to make sure that our transformation plans are enabling as many children as possible to live as normal a life as possible within their own family setting, because that's the best place for them in most cases. But where it's not, we will intervene, and it won't be driven by whether or not we're a national average or whether we're better than the regional average. It'll be determined by what the child actually needs. So I can't answer your question precisely on the ins and outs, can't give you a definite answer about the impact of lockdown on numbers coming in, but I can give you a clear steer on the numbers per 100,000.
Councillor Yates, do you want to come back in? Councillor Yates?
Only on a small point. I mean, that's very interesting to hear. I mean, the rates were associated with how the budgeting is done, so you can have a figure which is within the range of expectation, so to speak. So it wasn't so much a complaint that you weren't meeting that; it was more to do with how the budget is set going forward. I would imagine that the demand in Stoke-on-Trent does have an effect on the available spaces within Staffordshire per se, which puts pressure on you. You know, when the figures are that high, that must be difficult to accommodate within the boundaries of Stoke-on-Trent itself, and then use up spaces within Staffordshire which we could potentially use. But again, that's just a desperately sad situation.
Mr. Tradewell can have has an answer to that.
Well, just in terms of the placement market for children, it is effectively a national market, and it isn't just Stoke-on-Trent that might place children within Staffordshire. Other local authorities do as well. I think if you take sort of those in London, for example, placements in Staffordshire come at a lower cost than placements in accommodation in London. So there is that kind of market that affects us in Staffordshire. We do try and place as many children as possible in Staffordshire where we can, but when it comes to the more complex children with those particularly challenging needs, then there is a real competition for places nationally. They are so hard to find, those really complex needs placements. So it does result in us having to, at times, put children into placements outside Staffordshire. So I think the other thing to say is that we have been looking at that whole issue of placements and how we accommodate children, looking to find ways to increase the numbers who can be put into fostering, so both increasing fostering capacity internally and looking at how we use external fostering is something that we're seriously interested in. And also there's a project at the moment within Children's Services to look at placements. So can we open more children's homes of our own, or do something else that might change the market? And I think we're very shortly due to have an additional children's home of our own come onto the market at the Firs in Stafford. So that may be the start of something that we continue to do.
Thank you. Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning. It's very easy in these sorts of sessions just to focus on the negative side of things, and not that I feel sorry. By the way, I should just say in passing, because it comes with the territory. But I just thought it was just for a sense of balance, worth just picking up a couple of areas where actually, you know, there is some really good news and positive progress. I'm just a bit concerned the leader looks very whimsical and bemused. So I mean, you know, from what I read of the first quarter's report in terms of health and their social care numbers, they look good. Unemployment numbers look good. Not necessarily employment numbers, I hasten to add. There is a big difference, those who choose to be outside of the workforce. But the unemployment numbers look good. Residential earnings, you know, lots of the things that make a difference to our residents in Staffordshire and make Staffordshire a place for people to come to look good. And I think, you know, if no one mentions that, we lose the sense of balance because we only focus on the areas that we're concerned about because of performance. So you'll know that that's where I'm going to go next, so I'm going to go there. Just a couple of thoughts on these. So first of all, in terms of the placement costs, you know, I've got particular experience having seen some of these. I hope that within placements, particularly where those placement costs for young people are expensive well, let's say they're expensive. I hope we check the value for money. You know, I hope we check that the provider who's charging a lot of money is ensuring that those young people are in school and are encouraged to get the most out of their learning, because actually there is a requirement to make sure that they are delivering value for money to the residents of all of Staffordshire. And I am concerned with a couple of cases I've seen that may not always be the case. And I think that if in recruiting these more extensive teams, if that gives time for people just to make sure in the annual reviews of suitability of placements that actually we are driving value for money for residents as well as for those young people, I think that will be a good thing for us to do. And I do have a couple of examples where I'd question that may not necessarily always be the case. But when you're spending upwards of £100,000, you want to make sure that per placement, you want to make sure that is really meeting the needs. I remain concerned about EHCP plans. You know, I notice that this graph only goes back 12 months. It is still not stabilised from what I can read of the graph. I would be interested in seeing the trend. You know, this is a statutory requirement for us to do an annual review, and I think the Cabinet Member for Finance is exactly right. We need to make sure that these EHCP plans meet young people's needs. And I'm concerned by not doing them on time. A, we are in breach of statutory guidance, but B, for young people who change really fast, we may not be meeting their needs in their entirety. So there is more than just a stat behind this. There is an impact on individuals. And if I go to page 25 of the pack, I was really surprised by the level of re-referral rate within 12 months of young people. So, you've got, a stat that is touching 60% within Staffordshire, but a re-referral rate just under 20%. So that would seem to infer to me that there is a re-referral rate within 12 months of a third of the people who come out of the service, if I'm reading the chart right. Now, it may be that I'm not reading the chart right, and in which case, I would just seek greater clarification on the bottom of page 25.
Page 25, and it's got total GDA in Staffordshire billions.
The one I've got is offer the best start in life dashboard. Okay, we're all on different pages. But it's this one at the bottom which starts rate of children referred, rolling 12-month average, and it was the bottom dotted line versus the Staffordshire line that I was just querying, because if these, I would hope that the intervention was lasting, I guess is the point I was making, and it surprises me, and it may be just my reading of this chart, and I've not picked this up before previously, and apologies for that. My final other comment, just in passing while I've got the microphone without being too long. We talked about the lockdown implication, and I was slightly concerned on page 37, but it might not be page 37 if my pack is wrong, that there was £3 million worth of capital available for COVID measures. And it strikes me that we could find 1 million measures for those people who have been massively affected by COVID. And I implore the council not to let that £3 million go back to central government, because if you do nothing more than put it into further education or into any education actually to mitigate some of the impacts on our young people from COVID, that will pay you back many, many times over the decades to come by mitigating the impact of COVID. Thank you.
Councillor White?
Thank you. I'll start with the last one first. I've noted the £3 million uncommitted at this time on page 35 of my pack at the top. Yeah, you make a fair point around the £3 million uncommitted, and I'll make sure that the portfolio holder ensures that there is a plan for that. And my goodness, I really wouldn't want to be returning anything to government. It's hard enough to get anything out of government in the first place, let alone getting stuff, handing stuff back. And anybody in a district or borough who's had a negative RSG over the years will have known the pain of that. As far as the re-referral rate is concerned, I don't have an answer to the reason behind that percentage at this point, and I don't know if nobody else can help me out at the moment, so I'll have to come back to you on that one. The children's placements, all children, the overwhelming majority of children's placements are regulated, as most councillors in the room are aware of, and they're regulated through the Ofsted and, in certain circumstances, CQC. Or am I going to get a shake of it? Ofsted. There we go, got it right first time. So there is an expectation that compliance with the Ofsted inspection regime will result in outcomes for children that we would hope and expect. That said, we would always anticipate that those providers go above and beyond to make sure the children are realising their potential, and the additional staff that we have in place may enable us to do more thorough checks over and above that required of Ofsted. I've always been a little reluctant, particularly when I was adult social services portfolio holder, of imposing our own inspection regime on top of the national inspection regime. Otherwise, we end up with many staff doing lots of ticking of boxes and less time delivering services for the people that we're supposed to be looking after. So I've always been a little reluctant to go down that particular route. You talked about EHCPs and EHCP delays in particular. We are required to do EHCP assessments in a timely way, but don't forget that if a parent asks for an EHCP, then the parent has to have that the EHCP has to be delivered. And sometimes an EHCP is asked with just, sometimes let's be quite frank with each other. Not everybody who asks for an EHCP is going to actually need an EHCP. And there is an encouragement in some places for them to actually go ahead and get that done. It's interesting speaking to some parents, as I have done over the past couple of years, about EHCPs. And when one or two who I've spoken to have had their the EHCPs come back, well, their assessments come back and said they don't actually need a plan, their attitude has been, well, what do the assessors know? I'm the parent, I know best. And that creates tension between the school and the parent and the local authority. And actually, if we're not careful with the way EHCPs are going, and unless there's some changes to the Ofsted regime and the way that education is delivered across England, at some point in the not too distant future, you can foresee that every child in England is going to have an EHCP at the rate we're going. The numbers we've got at the moment are high and increasing all the time. So what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? Is it an inspection regime for the schools and an incentive regime for the schools which encourages them to encourage children to go to EHCPs? Or is it that there's lots of children that actually need EHCPs, and somewhere between those 2 points is the correct answer? And it cannot be the case that the rate of growth of EHCPs is A, sustainable, and B, appropriate, because otherwise that's just acknowledging that the whole education system is needing reform. I've gone on a slight rant there, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, but I will ask Councillor Parry to come in, because there'd be a couple of detailed points that he may well just wish to touch upon. You talk about employment and the employment numbers being pretty healthy. I have been continually concerned over my entire time as a councillor about the rate of worklessness. There's a lot of people who choose not to be in the workforce, and that's fine. There's a whole range of reasons why they choose not to be in the workforce. But actually, participating in the workforce and participating in society does bring its own benefits. in terms of mental health and well-being, and also your feeling of being part of your community. So I would always encourage people who perhaps have chosen for various reasons not to participate in the world of work to take up opportunities that do exist. We have more vacancies available in Staffordshire than we have people to fill them. So there are always opportunities for people to get involved in whatever way that they can according to their ability. Councillor Parry, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm grateful for the highlighting some of those points, and there's a couple of other interesting stats, a couple which stand out really, which is the number of start-up businesses that are sustaining beyond the normal 5-year period. So that does show some robustness in our start-up economy. Growth in earnings in Staffordshire recently outstripping regional and national increases in household incomes. That hasn't been the case historically. You know, we've been below, but I think it's showing that the growth is improving in Staffordshire. So I guess what we need to understand, we need all of us to recognise that economies are not perfect, that they don't always balance. So there will be times when, you know, we don't have enough jobs and there are people without a job. We're in the fortunate position where we have almost full employment in economic context, in economic description, almost full employment and surplus opportunities. So, as the leader said, more jobs and we've got people to fill them. Is that a good problem to have? Is it a better problem to have than having the reverse of that? It probably is, but it also has its implications on businesses, doesn't it, where they can't find the appropriate workforce, employees to meet the requirements they have. And we see this manifesting itself probably more in the service industries of leisure, hospitality, etc., where those have been probably harder to recruit, and also into some of the primary industries, you know, in parts of agriculture. And I noticed my local pick your own isn't happening this year. I presume partly because of the intensive labour requirement that these places have. So we've got some challenges, but we haven't got the challenges that have historically, I think, beleaguered our economy. I think we've got some positive horizons ahead.
Can I bring in Lindsay Bissell, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the back of Councillor Oates' question around the re-referrals, so just to put a little bit of context into the information regarding the graphs, what that means is when a family or a child is referred into the children's system, for example, that child might then move on to a child in need plan, early help plan. Once that family is then closed, what that statistic is when that another referral's made on that same child within 12 months. So as you can see from the chart, Staffordshire's always been pretty steady. It's a key indicator for Ofsted, actually. It's one of the things that they really look at, particularly during an inspection, because it can tell you a lot around what's happening in the system. For example, are we closing children too quickly, which means they then come back into the system because the work that we've done is not enough. So I'll need to check the national benchmarking figure, but Staffordshire used to be quite good on that measure. So we've always seen around 18-19% with that measure. Hope that helps.
Could Councillor Pert please forgive Mrs Blissell that you are Councillor Pert. You don't, absent the luxuriant beard.
Please, I didn't take it personally, it was fine. I'm sure it's probably something on this this board here. And I would have made exactly the same mistake. We're both as attractive as each other. I was going to make just 2 points very briefly. I think the comments are very fair in response. I think the point I was trying to get to in terms of the placement costs was really not to add another layer of complexity over the top, just to make sure that the outcomes that are being achieved are what were anticipated as part of the original EHCP. And that was probably where I was at. Just make sure that we're very outcomes focused, not necessarily we've written the EHCP, it finishes there. And I'm sure that we'd all want the same sort of thing. And the second thing I was going to mention was in terms of the labour market. And I think you're exactly right. And the thing that came to mind was innovation is the mother of invention. And actually, there is a shortage of people in the labour market, but hopefully it will ensure that we look very creatively, and we are the creative county after all, at trying to innovate and find different ways and new ways of doing things. You only have to look at agriculture, and you've got a lot of that in Staffordshire. You know, you're now into driverless tractors, you're now into all sorts of things. I'm not suggesting that we want to get rid of human intervention altogether, but I do think that it throws up great opportunities for businesses who are creative to think of new ways of delivering services and meeting people's needs. Thank you.
Councillor Spencer.
Chairman, thank you. I had a few questions, but they've all been addressed with the previous answers, so thank you very much.
Any other questions from anybody? I have a few questions, as you would expect, Councillor Parry, on the finances, if you don't mind. And whilst you're absolutely right, it is about children. We can't get away or escape from the fact that the overspend that we see in point 5 on page 11 of 9.5 million compared to the balanced budget of 8.2 million. And this is an area of risk and concern for us as a council. I suppose the obvious question to you would be, how long can we continue with this position of overspend, presently 1.39, whilst we see it's acceptable to have a level up to 2% of variation? Are we expecting this to increase, in your view, in the coming months? And I know you probably need a crystal ball to answer that question, but just want to get your sense of where you think this is going and what measures have been put in place to sort of mitigate some of that going forward, please.
Thank you. It's an interesting question. I'm going to start with the known knowns, and that is that we know the number of children coming into the care system has increased. We know the complexity of costs is prevalent. The known unknowns is, what's the ceiling look like? What does that rise in the number of children come to the care system look like? What is that top level? Because that's probably where your ceiling costs are, if you did nothing about it. But the idea is that we intervene in that and do something about it so you don't keep rising like that. What we know, and if we've done some rough benchmarking, you know, do we have more children in care that we are not, if you like, managing the front door efficiently and helping children to stay in safe and secure households? Are we doing enough around that early intervention with families to ensure that we don't escalate that issue and therefore children falling into the care system? And once they're in the care system, are we doing enough to try and ensure that they reach permanent solutions, if you like, and not bounced around the care system, but go into permanency? And that's held up by backlogs in the court system and those sort of issues outside of our control. So there are some things that we know about, and we know what needs to be done, and we are doing those things. The question, I think, is, are we doing enough of that at enough pace, and is what we're doing showing any signs of working? And it's still showing signs of potentially working, but I'm not quite sure if that's a light at the end of the tunnel or a train coming towards me at the moment. So there is some time that we need to buy. There's some extra work that we need to do. There is some trust and confidence in the strategy, but there's also some skepticism about whether we need to just adjust our strategy, make some additional effort, if you like, or a change in strategy. Otherwise, we are looking at the ceiling, and who knows what that looks like, and that's what we want to try and avoid. I hope that's useful.
Thank you for that. At point 8, it talks about the demand of safeguarding contacts, and it talks about the possibility of getting additional resource outside to provide and help with the increased demand. And again, with the DOLS, the Deprivation of Liberty Safeguard, it talks about the possibility of procuring additional capacity. Those two measures, will they be an added cost to the authority in those two areas?
what we're experimenting with at the moment, exploring at the moment, is if we can, as Mr. Treadwell has explained, if we can have some of our own provision, and we've just started with our first housing accommodation unit here in Stafford, is there an opportunity for us to disrupt the market a little bit to make sure that we don't get put under undue pressure on costs? Because this is specialist stuff. You need to have people who know how to look after children. This is not incarceration. This is providing homes, safe places for children to have a reasonable chance of good outcomes. So that gets expensive. What we're trying to do is to make sure that we are sensible about placements and are sensible about managing costs. And some of the things that we will want to do is to see how we can intervene in the marketplace to make sure that we can maintain its competitiveness in our favour.
Thank you. I've only got a couple more, Councillor Parry, if you don't mind. If we can go to the latest financial summary at Appendix 2, which is at page 31 on my papers. It may well be different for other members depending where you've picked them up from. Just looking at the savings tracker target of 11.176 million. And it mentions in the report that savings are categorised into confident delivery, which is exactly the right approach. However, how confident are you that the 6.118 million, which are classed as low confidence, will be achieved throughout the remaining term of this council?
So this is our Church Spire Restoration Fund graphic. And there is always an element of savings targets that is hard to reach. But you've got to have that savings target in there, haven't you? You can't say, well, that looks like it's hard to do, so we won't do it. We put it in there and we work damn hard to do it. We work on a principle of pound out, pound in, or pound in, pound out. So if you want to go provide me with that pound saving over there, find something else to give me another pound then. That's the way we try and operate. We're not at the level where we were a few years ago, where we were doing large-scale transformation and major savings, with which we were extraordinarily, I think, successful at it, which means part of the reason why we have good financial stability now in the council is because of the work that we've done in the past and continue to do. So yeah, I'm not 100% confident in some of this stuff. I think we'll see some things not delivered at the end of the year. Bit early to tell, given that we've just finished Q1, of how much of that red we won't be able to achieve.
So the implications of that not being achieved, is that we need to look at in other areas potentially for those savings or efficiencies?
Yes, and if you look at the rest of the revenue budget, apart from children and families, everything is flatline, everything is bang on budget. It does show you that we have very good budgetary management in this council. That's due to systems that have been put in place, a culture of understanding the importance of budgetary control in our officer colleagues, and I hope good political leadership from cabinet colleagues and the leader to ensure that we instill that level of discipline within our financial management, which allows us to achieve that. The same goes for savings targets. So if we don't achieve that at the end of the year, I would hope that we'd find it from somewhere else. But there's usually a 1% variance at the year end anyway, and that would cover that. And whilst we're obviously very sensitive about use of reserves, there is scope for that as well.
I mean, just going back, I mean, overall, the position is really good for the County Council, and we shouldn't get away from that, and it's a well-run authority. But there are that one area in children's services which could completely topple us as an authority if we don't keep it under control, and in some way try to make sure we mitigate where we're going with that, as well as trying to achieve the other savings that you talk about in the paper. And I'm glad to hear that you say that cabinet colleagues will be within their service areas to make sure that their officers are working with them to deliver those efficiencies and savings where they can, and at the same day being able to get good value for money for our residents. time, please. Councillor White.
Whilst we have that, I'm pleased that you've acknowledged that, Chair, and I'm very grateful for that. Whilst there is that stability in financial control and management, there are obviously other areas which we've alluded to in the report. There are operational challenges as well, that we don't feel we've got exactly right now. We want to invest in those. There are some great opportunities as well that we want to look at. The things around our leisure and culture offer, for example, with the new history centre coming on stream and linking that to potentially doing more work around our library offer and our leisure offer and our countryside, etc. So there's lots of good, positive things that we want to work on. So there are challenges, but there are opportunities in there as well. And I think we're in a very fortunate position as a council to be able to have that.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been very keen over the past few years to ensure that we're able to deliver financial stability. Because without financial stability, we can't do anything else. And we can't attend to the expectations of the people that put us here, and in particular highways. And that's the reason why, one of the reasons why Councillor Parry, through his portfolio, is able to ensure that we can get an additional £15 million over and above what we budgeted for highways each year in order to put more into those roads. But the point about the children's transformation programme is one that has caught everybody's attention, undoubtedly. And as a result of that, Cabinet and Senior Leadership Team will be focusing on that at an away day in September. It is a very, very important topic that we need to address and understand the causes, understand whether or not the plan we currently have is still relevant, or whether we need to modify that plan in order to deliver the stability that we need in children's services. Ultimately, if we have to spend more on children's services, we have to spend more on children's services. But what I'm looking for throughout this authority is stability. It looks like, when you're reading through this report, that children's services aren't stable, because that's the reason why 3 months into the financial year we find yourself with an overspend of, or a forecast outturn of £9.7 million. The other area of concern around children, and particularly education, is the high needs block. And you'll have seen the graphs within the pack where the high needs block is in danger of running away. And the only reason why we can afford to continue in this way at the moment is I think it's called a general exemption. Yeah, I can never remember the terminology that's applied to the way that we have to deal with the money associated with the high needs block. You see across England a whole host of authorities where the high needs block is really getting seriously out of control. And if government at some point says, you know what, we're going to require you to include that in your budgets, that will create a big challenge for Councillor Parry in his portfolio, won't it, Ian?
That would be.
Heard. But now I have, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Funny enough, I had a couple of supplementaries, and one of them was exactly on this DSG block, because you only have to see the graph on page 38 of the pack, 40 on my numbers, just to see that cumulative deficit potentially running away and being like a train out of control. And I think that is a significant concern. But linked in the same area, I note that on page 37, that there is going to be that review of SEND transport that the MTFS working group recommended last year. And I just wonder whether that's coming through fast enough. Because transport is one of these things that is dynamic and moves all the time. And trying to do these very static reviews, I know someone who's very good in transport, by the way. But these static reviews every two or three years is probably, not dynamic enough to make sure that we're meeting young people's needs, because that's been done by presumably a lot of single-use transport. And actually, we would be far better looking at doing regular reviews as it comes by. So that'd be my first sort of area. My second area related to recycling rates, and it looked like we'd sort of plateaued on recycling rates. That's page 27, and there is a bit of seasonality in that. I accept that there's some seasonality, but obviously going forwards, trying to stop using stuff that isn't environmentally friendly or could be delivered in different ways is clearly important, as is recycling as much as we can. And I was just sort of slightly concerned that actually, if you look at the trend over the since the quarter 4 2021, actually the trend isn't really that great. And linked to that, I noticed that there was some comment on page 40 about point 102 about wood fuels. And I'm assuming you're burning wood fuels, and I would have thought that was the last thing that we wanted to do, because one of the things that we know about wood is that they store carbon. And the moment you burn them, they release the carbon. So I'm surprised that we're using wood fuels if that's the case. I may have got that completely out of context, but I thought I ought to just at least mention it in passing, because we do need to look at the end-to-end cost environmentally as well as financially. And the final point I just make isn't a minor point. If I asked most of my residents within my division, I'm not being parochial, but if I haven't asked everyone else's divisional residents, so I'm not going to go down that route. But if I asked most of mine, they would be concerned about highways. I wonder whether we could put within the key areas of concern on page 10 something which relates to highways, because I would hate anyone to think that we'd finished highways, because it's part of the work in progress. I don't think it's complete by any amount of means. I do think it needs to be one of the key areas of concern until we've got to a point where actually customer satisfaction with sorting out potholes and sorting out drainage is high, and it isn't in my division, certainly at this moment in time.
I'll start at the beginning. High needs block is a national concern. Some councils have got, I mean, all the numbers are eye-watering, but some councils have got figures that if the government took the restriction off would be absolutely devastating in government finance terms. So we're confident that it will remain like that. So it's not necessarily, we record it, but aren't necessarily our liability. And I think that's the way we have to face that. In terms of waste and recycling, I'm going to have to defer to the leader on that. But in terms of highway investment, as you know, that has been significant over the last few years. An extra 15 million last year, an 80 million pound spend in our highways infrastructure. It's something which we continue to invest in, and only just recently we invested in a Pothole Pro, the first person I like to think of, others coming along behind it, but we'll see, I hope, a difference that will make. So there is no lack of willingness, there is no lack of finding enough resources, but there is a limitation on how much you invest in highways in a particular year, because it's not something you can turn off and on like a tap. So you put too much money into it and basically there's a diminishing return. So we are mindful that we work with highways to see what can be achieved with the budget that's available.
And thank you for the hospital pass from Councillor Parry about recycling numbers. I have the pleasure of having been the chairman of the Joint Waste Management Board for Staffordshire many years ago, and waste and recycling was an area that I was particularly interested in for quite some time. You'll see if you look at the graph in a sort of 3-year span there, you'll see how it does a wave type pattern. And that wave type pattern is in part due to the composting rates that you get during winter. So you'll see in the springtime Q1, when people start to get out of their houses and start doing gardening and putting stuff in brown bins, the rates, or whatever colour bin you've got across the county, the rates will increase. Of course, we have a 2-tier collection and disposal service across the county of Staffordshire, with the districts and boroughs collecting the waste and the county council disposing of the waste. That requires the marketing for recycling to be done at district and borough level. And of course, across the county, we've got varying types of properties that will get collections from them. So if you're living in a terraced house, perhaps somewhere in Burton-upon-Trent, it's quite difficult to do some of the multiple bin arrangements that people have, same as in Lichfield or perhaps Newcastle or other places. And so that does have an impact on recycling rates, and that target of just below 60% is one that we would hope to achieve, but has been proven to be difficult over the past few years. We do need to put some more effort into it, but I would note that we do send hardly anything to landfill at all, and so I think that's a good position. As far as wood burning is concerned, I don't know the details of that. I'll have to get back to you in due course. If you could take notes, please, Lindsay. Thank you.
Councillor Bird, did you want to briefly come back?
Yeah, just 2 points in response. One is we didn't pick up on the SEND transport review, what the outcomes and when we're going to see some benefits there. But you know, I'm happy to receive that in a written response. It's not critical. And the other one is, can I encourage? And it's always difficult with government and with individual pots. Can I encourage some way of trying to flatten out the highways investment rather than creating this huge expectation with 62 county councillors having the same amount of money to try and fill potholes, because someone is going to be first on the list and someone is going to be 62nd on the list. And if you're 62nd on the list, you may find that it's 12 months before you actually see your potholes repaired. So can I just encourage a bit more flattening out of some of these schemes? I know that's difficult with government money, but in which case then it might go round a bit more sort of evenly across the county. But I do accept the point on the JCB Pothole Pro, having seen one in action recently. You know, interesting bits of kit, and hopefully it'll make a fundamental difference to our roads. Thank you.
The SEND Transport Review is something that's getting started. It's something I'm very keen that we ensure we deliver. There is a sort of overhang from COVID in some SEND transport where you've got single-use taxi rides because during the COVID pandemic it was one child per taxi. There's plenty of scope, I think, and I'll see the evidence in due course this financial year for sure, or certainly this side of Christmas, to ensure that we're not having single-use taxis at all, and also making sure that SEND transport resembles transport for kids in mainstream schools as well. If you're a child at a mainstream school, you're expected to walk to the bus stop. Now, of course, there are circumstances for some SEND children where that's not possible, but of course, being able to go to if there's a village with 3 children who've got SEND needs and they're all going to the same destination, is it possible to have a single collection point rather than the taxi going from place to place? Because I think it's quite important that SEND children's lives resemble mainstream children's lives as much as possible, because that's what we're preparing people for. That's as close to mainstream life as we can possibly manage. As far as the highways budgeting is concerned, it doesn't quite work like that, Councillor Pert. There are 8 or so areas around the county where each individual district and borough type area is dealt with. So you might be last on the list of 8 county councillors in your borough, but that's not going to be the case as it happens. And as far as the spend is concerned into highways, when we were contemplating how much additional investment we would put in highways, Councillor Parry was very clear about it. We can put as much investment into highways as you like, but can we spend it efficiently? Or are we just chucking money out, good money after bad? We've got to make sure that the money that is invested in highways actually ends up in tangible results. Because what we've had before is we've put a lot of money into highways and found that money's not been well spent. And so it's very, very important that any additional investments into that department results in improved highways for our residents. I'd say, though, in conclusion to this, is that don't forget that a road has a lifespan. And over successive governments, it doesn't matter which political persuasion they are, there has not been sufficient investment into roads. A road's got a lifespan of perhaps 20 years before it's knackered. That's probably an inappropriate term at your committee, Mr. Chairman, but what?
It's a technical term.
Technical term. And then it needs some pretty important work on it. We haven't been receiving that sort of investment from central government. We are a very centralised country, and therefore we've had to raise the money locally to repair roads as we go along. So I do, when I'm speaking to people who are based in other places, brackets Westminster, remind them of the fact that actually we do need investments into our highways, and that requiring county councils and unitaries and other upper tier local authorities to just get on with and make do is causing a great deal of dissatisfaction amongst our residents, and we feel it as county councillors, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chairman. It would be remiss of me not to come back to Councillor Pert's comments about highways. We need to remember, in a positive way, we need to remember that highways is not static, it's a moving picture. And now that we have taken inspectors back in-house, we have a better inspection rate of potholes per se, and we've got the one place approach. So if there's 4 potholes in one area, fingers crossed, they should all get fixed at the same time. Councillor Williams was very adamant that, you know, you can't just go to a road and fix one pothole and leave another 3. You've got to fix the whole area. And I know that isn't quite right yet, because I've seen it in my own division, but we're getting there. And a plea really that, you know, all members have got this extra money, work with your highways managers and identify the issues within your own divisions, because, you know, they can't be everywhere. They've got a massive area to cover, and we need to be making sure we're working better with them. Obviously, Councillor White is right. You know, the road span is normally 20 years. Main roads, obviously, that's going to be less if you've got a high volume of traffic, i.e. buses and HGVs. And people are now saying about electric cars being heavier and wrecking the roads. Well, that's a total non-starter from the beginning. Councillor Pert, you might have 62 councillors, but as that Councillor White says, it doesn't quite work like that. We've got 8 districts, so you need to again be working with your highways team and making sure that your district of Stafford is done cohesively and you all work together. We've got better member engagement now. And Highways Transformation Plan is an ongoing programme. It's not stopped and it will keep on going. And I know that Councillor Parry and Councillor White will be banging the drum for Staffordshire to get more money to fix our roads wherever they can. And I know Councillor Pert's going to now come back in.
Councillor Pert.
Having been named Chairman, I think it's only fair that I come back. I would just like to redress the balance. I don't want a long debate on
No,
highways,
we don't.
But I think the member needs to be very careful not to make assumptions. I meet with highways on a monthly basis. We talk about the same things for 15 or more months on the same bits of pothole, the same bits of road and the same bits of drainage. And frankly, they are frustrated and they are fed up of being wet. They're fed up of falling into the same pothole. I take the point. I really hope that the transformation work is a recognition of the issues that remain within highways and within AMI, and that we will see some real benefits going forwards, because I know that is the desire of Cabinet. It is not finished business, and I hope that we get there. And that's probably as much as I want to say. I think you can sense the frustration, but to suggest that anyone is not doing anything, I'm working as hard as I possibly can, probably overtime, on something that actually I think the officers should be resolving within the council, rather than leaving the councillors to kick the door in on a regular basis.
Thank you, Councillor Pert. I suggest you take up that with the relevant Cabinet member, or at least have a conversation with Councillor Clements after this meeting. Councillor Heath.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, first I'd like to thank the leader for acknowledging and recognising the amount of roads we have in the Moorlands, and I'd like him to put the budget accordingly to the amount of roads we have. But we talk a lot about reviews and costs, and I know, I mean, as a farmer you get the blame for the roads weren't made for the heavy tractors and the heavy vehicles that the farms have now, things like that, so I take that on board. But we talk a lot about reviews. And I wondered if we could review the DHP that each councillor gets. Because when we had it, it was marvellous, because we've had it quite a while now, and it used to buy a few little jobs. But to me, it is a publicity thing now, and it seems to, with the parish councils, and I have over 20 parish councils, with very, very few residents, some of them only 150 maybe, or 180, so very low presets. So the DHP is looked at very friendly. but it doesn't go anywhere. And I wondered if we could, perhaps the prosperous scrutiny could sort of look into it, or the leader. When we had it, you put a job forward, it got looked at, and if it needed doing, it got done. And it was great, even if you had to save 2 years up to get some jobs done. But now they brought this feasibility study in. So we have £1,500 for a feasibility study out of the DHP. A couple of studies or things you put forward, that's your money gone. So they come up with, oh, it's going to cost 8,000, it's going to cost 6,000, but there's no money there to do it with because your money's gone on the feasibilities. So is it just publicity to get the blame put on the councillor because she's not performing and not doing what she's promised she'd look into? It never used to be this. It used to be spent on the work. So, yeah, maybe a review.
I was going to say, Councillor Heath, maybe that's something that we're going into the work programme, and maybe it's something that, through the overview and scrutiny process, we should be looking at to see whether or not they're questions that can be asked. Not particularly for this meeting now, but particularly at an ONS function in the future, that we can have a look at that going forward. That's okay with you, Councillor Heath?
Yes, that's
fine. Did you want to come in, Councillor Wilde, or can I close? All I was going to say was...
You've done it for me, Chairman. I'm not making policy on the hoof.
No.
So if the Scrutiny Committee wants to take that away and do a bit of overview work on it, please feel free and let's look at some potential solutions to it. But I won't make policy on the hoof at this meeting.
Can I thank you, and in his absence, the Cabinet Member for Finance, for bringing this report to us this morning. I'm now going to go to the recommendation. Everyone's happy with that. The recommendation is that committee members note and challenge performance and advise any further information and or action required. And I think we've given that a really good go this morning in relation to that. So once again, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5, which is the work programme. Happy if people, if members want to leave, you're more than happy, officers, if you wanted to leave at this stage and Charlie in, or you can stay for the riveting section that comes up next. Okay, so if we move into the work programme, Mandy, if you want to just go through the basics of the work programme, and then we can have a discussion on it, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next meeting is scheduled for the 12th of September, where you've got the work programmes from all of the scrutiny committees and the annual complaints report and Ombudsman annual report. The meeting after that, 24th of October.
I think October meeting, we're going to move, and thanks to everyone that came back with the suggestion, we're going to move to the 6th of November. The date should have been in your diary anyway, it's normally reserved for a call-in. I unfortunately am not here on the October doing something for the Local Government Association, so I'm very pleased that we're able to move that to the 6th of November, and we've checked with all the relevant portfolio holders who should be in attendance on that date.
Yes, Chair, I'll move that meeting if the committee's happy with that. And then the work programme is as printed at the moment.
Mr. Pert.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just make one point in terms of the complaints? It would strike me that from a health and care overview scrutiny perspective, that actually having a feed of complaints into committee, into the health committee, is quite useful just to pick up early advance warning trends. And so I think there is some work going on just to try and pull a sub-feed from the corporate annual review of complaints, some of the detail which relates to health and care, not to reinvestigate them, but just to try and pick up early trends. And I just thought that was just relevant to mention, certainly not looking to duplicate the work that is already done very adequately by this committee, but just to make sure that we have an early warning to take alongside things like KPIs as well as any feedback from people like Health Watch. Thank you.
I think it's really important with the work programme that if chairs or vice chairs have issues that want to come up that they want to put into the work programme, it's a living document, it can be changed, it can be amended. We need to make sure we do that. We just need to make sure that we give enough time if there's reports that are needed by officers, etc. for that meeting. Councillor Willington.
Thank you, Mike. I totally agree with Councillor Heath's proposal. I think we need to look into this because, as you know, without DHP money, I mean, I've never known anything being dragged down. I mean, I approve some work to be done at Mill Lane, Wetley Rocks, where they've got yellow lines, but they weren't lawful. So you couldn't give someone a ticket for parking outside the school because they weren't done correctly. So I'll get it all approved, and then they say they're going to make a slight amendment, so we're going to go out to consultation. Well, all this consultation cost me bleeding money, so I can't get jobs done because they're consulting to death. I've given the instructions to get on with it. I was losing my rag a little bit with Lisa, you know, with the lady at the council, because I said, Lisa, I said, just get on with this work. It's gone through the parish council, it's been approved. Just get the job done, because it's just taking money off my DHP, just like what Councillor Heath says. So, no, I mean, I had £7.5 grand.
Chair, I think we've already done this, and I think myself and Councillor White have agreed to look at this and take it away. And we've moved on to the work programme, I thought.
Well, I want to be part of the work programme to discuss it.
I think Councillor Clements has said that she's going to work and have a look at that to see whether it can be something coming to the Prosperous Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
We can look at it, but if there's no money, we can't do it. So that's where Alan White comes in.
I think it's perhaps that we're talking about the process of how it's done, maybe.
The description of the DHP, which was okay when it started, but it's something that is putting the blame of the things that don't get done on the councillor, not the county, because the money's gone in the preparation, the consultations, the ifing and ahhing, and we forget the basic it needs doing.
Councillor Pert.
Chair, I think I indicated earlier that actually I monitor everything that comes to me from a resident. It takes 4 years on average to get any one of these schemes sorted. You know, it's certainly not a lachrymose. I think the process is the last afterthought of someone's job, and actually I think that's part of the issue here. I welcome the suggestion for it to go to Prosperous, and maybe we can all get an invite to it, because some of us around this table have some very practical knowledge firsthand. I'm happy to share any information I have with the relevant individuals.
I think that will be down to the chair of Prosperous, whether that is, or whether written submission may be quicker and easier, rather than personal attendance. Yeah. The other thing to say that the corporate ONS meeting on the 12th of September, immediately after that we will have our chairs and vice chairs little get together. We might as well do it the same day while we're here, as opposed to try and get a different time. And the vice chairs can either come and join us at corporate and observe us, or they could just come on Teams at the end of it to have that meeting. You can also remind the chair of who? Oh, chair of Prosperous, possibly. The other thing to say is, at the end of this meeting today, can the chairman move to the library, where we just want to have a discussion about the meeting in the morning with the political cabinet, if we can, please. So, anything else on the work programme from anybody? No? Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
I know the work programme's been decided, but I have a concern where doctors and doctor's surgeries, and I don't know who to go to ask that question, because I have a doctor's surgery that I feel needs investigating, and I don't know how far or where to take that to.
I think Councillor Perk can take that outside the meeting for you and have that discussion with Councillor Thompson.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? No? Fine. So that brings us to item 6, with the exclusion of the public. There's nothing in confidential. So we will close the meeting at 14 minutes past 11. Thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, Chairman.